Chad Daybell's death penalty trial was a fight for his life. The prosecution came armed with an overwhelming amount of evidence. Meanwhile, Chad's defense leaned heavily on his role as the family patriarch and his good standing in the Mormon Church. But would his children's support and testimony be enough to sway the jury? Or would their words backfire spectacularly? These are the questions we'll be tackling in today's video. Hello and welcome to the channel, where we explore true crime, false prophets, and pop culture. If you like this video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Let's dive in. Welcome, true crime heroes. Today we're exploring the testimonies of Tammy's children in Chad Daybell's trial. First up, Emma Murray. Chad's lawyer, David Pryor, started off by inquiring about Tammy's health. Emma claimed she watched her mother's health decline for an entire year. Emma never says, nor does David Pryor ever ask, if Emma offered to help or even asked if anything was wrong. Full disclosure, I have edited these clips for brevity and clarity. I'll put the links to the entire testimony as covered by East Idaho News in the description below. Here's Emma's testimony.
I want to talk a little bit about your mother's health. What can you tell me in general about your mother's health in the last year or so?
Her health started declining. I was really worried about it. She'd always been one to be able to meet the demands of daily life without being exhausted. And she started going to bed at before dinner some nights. It would be 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. And she would sleep in too if given the opportunity. So suddenly needing to sleep a lot was very confusing to me.
Remember, Emma lived catty-corner from Tammy, and they worked together at the same school. And yet for an entire year, the subject of her mother's health never came up? This incongruity set up an odd tone for the rest of her interview. While on the stand, Emma described her mother's use of alternative remedies. She recounted helping her mother carry books at school prior to a book fair, and confirmed that Tammy did drive the family's Dodge Dakota. Pryor's aim was clear. He wanted to paint a picture of Tammy's death as a natural consequence of declining health. He also wanted to claim a case of mistaken identity and argue that Chad was actually the intended target the night that Tammy shot at. But Emma's testimony was filled with subtle digs at her deceased mother that undermined her claims. Let's take a listen to a few examples.
Were there any non-prescription medications or herbs or supplements that you're aware of?
Oh, definitely. She really liked using colloidal silver was her favorite. It can cure everything. I say that with a smile because you really should go to the doctor.
Yet she also says,
were you aware of any medications that your mother may have taken?
The generic form of the medication Prozac, that was the only prescribed medication that she regularly took.
Anyone who takes medication ongoing knows that you have to go to a doctor regularly in order to get your prescription refilled. Clearly, I don't know Tammy's specific circumstance. However, about 80% of drugs like Prozac are prescribed by a general practitioner. Therefore, it's probable that Tammy was seeing a general practitioner on a regular basis. And here Emma is describing how she helped Tammy move some boxes the day before she died.
Your mother was employed at a school, is that correct?
That's correct.
And on the 18th, was there some sort of an event or occurrence that was taking place at the school?
The next week, there was going to be a book fair.
Did you personally observe anything as far as your mother preparing for the book fair?
She loaded her personal belongings in boxes and loaded them heavier than perhaps she should have, because I observed her walking down the hallway and she was resting the box against her body on her arms, holding it back and walking with a lot of effort.
So not only is struggling with an awkwardly shaped, heavy box not evidence of an imminent death, Emma has to explain why she's the only one who sees Tammy in this light, and why the rest of the staff see Tammy as a vibrant and healthy woman. Let's take a listen to how she handles that quandary.
Now, in terms of interaction with other members of the school, how would you describe your mother's personality?
My mother was an introvert at the core. She could be friendly and small talk with people, but in general, I noticed she didn't confide in people. I also observed at that school, we, like many public schools, needed a lot more employees than we had. So she really didn't have time to visit. Even during lunchtime, when you would typically think someone could sit down and chat with a neighbor, she was helping students go through the lunch line and pay.
So Tammy was such an introvert that she proactively jumped in to help wherever she could. Gotcha. Emma then goes on to say she never personally saw Tammy confide in her coworkers about her health. Okay, fine, but still pretty weak tea. But not as weak or snarky as when Pryor brings up the Dodge Dakota.
Who was the primary driver of the Dodge Dakota?
My father.
Okay, and what would your mother be driving?
She would be driving a Chevy Equinox. She always liked to drive the nicer of the two vehicles.
Emma's odd blend of praise and pettiness was both baffling and damaging to Chad's defense. On the one hand, Emma describes a woman who spent her midday break helping kids get their lunch, someone whose work ethic and dedication to her job were so solid she rarely, if ever, called in sick.
Would you agree that it wasn't her habit to want to miss work?
She wanted to go every day.
Was that her work ethic, or was there some other underlying reason?
Her work ethic.
She described a woman who took care to bring her best self to work every day and who left her struggles at home to focus on serving the people around her. Yet Emma accused Tammy of cheating on her Fitbit step count to win a bet with her in-laws.
Your mother had a Fitbit, is that right?
Yes, she had a wristwatch that would count her steps.
And were you aware of any competition that was going on between Ed and Charlene Murray and your mother?
Yes, my father-in-law took a lot of steps during the day, and she wanted to be the winner, and so she would try to beat him.
At any time, did you observe your mother using an unusual manner in which to operate her Fitbit?
She was trying to get more steps to beat my in-laws.
There was a competition.
Yes.
Where did you observe her doing this with the Fitbit?
She had 2 locations where she would do this. She called it exercise. She would be in the living room. She would place an iPad on the back of a recliner and play the game Candy Crush while shaking her arm. And she would also lie in her bed while reading a book on her Kindle while shaking her arm.
Lindsay Blake for the prosecution was able to break in and put on the record that Emma and Chad had discussed this narrative about Tammy cheating with her Fitbit in preparation for trial. Emma's portrayal of her mother conflicted starkly with the image of Tammy as a hardworking, go-the-extra-mile woman her family, friends, and coworkers described. Emma even went so far as to claim that it was she, not Chad, who searched for wind direction information on her father's desktop computer for September 9th, the day Tylee was burned and buried in Chad's backyard. What in the world could be going on here? I'm no psychologist, but I do have a couple of observations. For one thing, even though Emma is an adult, married with children, she comes across as much younger and immature. Here she is taunting a reporter outside of Chad's home in 2020 while the investigators were still searching for the children's bodies.
Linda, she told me live there that she asked, even though we were not, I told her that we were legally able to be on the property, she asked me to leave during my live report, and I refused to leave. Wow.
Her lack of judgment seems more typical of a troubled teenager than a grown woman. Emma's aggressive and inappropriate behavior isn't the only example of her struggle to process information. At trial, prosecutor Rocky Wickham played footage of Chad talking with Emma while seated in the back of a squad car. This is after crews discovered human remains on the property and after Chad tried to make a run for it. He was then handcuffed and detained, but not yet arrested, and the officer let Emma come over to talk with him. Here's the officer describing their position relative to where the crews were unearthing Tylee's remains.
Detective Wheeler, can you just explain to the jury the positioning of your patrol vehicle relative to the Daybell property and vantage points that could be seen from where Mr. Daybell is sitting as he sits now?
From that position, he would just have to look over to his right shoulder and out that door, kind of towards the back of the vehicle.
What would he be able to see if he did that?
He'd be able to see the fire pit area for sure.
And to be clear, whose remains were found in the fire pit?
That was Tylee.
As these investigators spent perhaps some of the worst hours of their lives digging up, sifting through, and packing the remains of JJ and Tylee for transport, Emma and Chad discussed finances for close to a half an hour. The details included plans for Emma's family to move back into the house, what account should be used to pay the mortgage, and what to do with an old mattress. Here she is chuckling over her ability to get people to sympathize with her.
Keep paying the mortgage out of the company. No, you can probably set it up though. It's Wells Fargo. In that same pamphlet, remember the password.
Oh, look,
but
but I've had a lot of success with mom stuff, just saying, will you help me? My mom died. I'm pretty sure. Will you help me? My dad's in jail. Has the same.
It should be paid through July 1st.
Okay.
During this entire exchange, she does tear up over the prospect of losing her father a couple of times, yet she never expresses the slightest concern or even basic curiosity about the horrors unfolding just yards away. Of course, it's impossible to know what one would do in such a circumstance, so it's tricky to judge. On the other hand, by the time she testified, Emma had 4 years to process the magnitude of these crimes, and she doesn't seem to have gained any perspective or empathy for the victims in that intervening time. At the time of her testimony in 2024, she and her family were still living on the property where all 3 bodies were found. Perhaps her kids even played near JJ and Tylee's graves on a regular basis. Emma's testimony about Tammy is riddled with inconsistencies and lies, clashing with the multiple accounts already presented by family, friends, and colleagues who described a vibrant and healthy woman at trial. In the defense's attempt to describe Chad as an upstanding, faithful guy, David Pryor questioned both Garth and Emma about Chad's beliefs. Pryor tried to make it seem that Chad's teaching about a light and dark rating scale was standard fare in the LDS Church, but it is not. Likewise, casting out zombies and demons is not standard doctrine. Some of Chad's teachings certainly have roots in both Mormonism and Christianity. In addition, Chad's beliefs can be viewed within the larger context of Mormon extremist groups that people such as Julie Rowe, Jason Mao, and Christopher Parrott promoted, and which Tammy was most likely aware of. For instance, an event in July 2017 at the Rexburg Temple, hosted by a group called Preparing a People, attracted 2,000 attendees, filling the venue. The Preparing a People conferences are important to understand Chad and Lori's religious beliefs, and we will be covering that topic in a future video. However, there is no evidence that Tammy was as deeply involved in these groups as Chad, or even that she understood how extreme her husband's beliefs were. Emma also testified she saw her mother sign her life insurance policy at an insurance workshop during a school day. She swore she had firsthand knowledge that Chad never saw the insurance increase. All the prosecution had to do to rebut that lie was to show the actual contract signed September 8th, 2019, which was a Sunday, with both Chad and Tammy's signatures.
And counsel talked to you about an insurance policy that was increased. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said your mom did that on her own.
Yes.
Why was your dad's signature on the application?
I think she took out insurance on him.
Your Honor, may I be handed State's Exhibit 151? And Your Honor, may I ask that the witness be shown this exhibit?
You may.
Did you have a chance to look that over?
Yes.
Do you see on the back page whose signatures were there?
Yes.
And whose are those?
It says employee signature, Tamara M. Daybell. Spouse's signature of applying for coverage, Chad G. Daybell.
And do you see dates by those?
9/8/19.
Is it the same date on both signatures?
Yes.
And can you see that that's only insurance for your mother?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe Emma was confused about dates and signatures despite the certainty she displayed on the witness stand. But her multiple mischaracterizations and outright lies regarding her interaction with law enforcement around her mother's autopsy results were caught in 4K. Let's listen.
You were asked about when your mom was exhumed. Did you know there was going to be an autopsy?
I assumed there would be.
Once you learned she'd had one, did you want to see the results?
I did.
Do you recall law enforcement coming to meet with you and you telling them, nope, I don't want to know?
I didn't say that.
Do you recall indicating you did not want to sit down or that you were unwilling to sit down and have them share the autopsy results with you?
No.
You don't recall that?
That's not what I said.
What did you say?
I told them I didn't want to interview with them. I wanted to see the results, and I did not want to discuss it with them.
And do you recall them indicating you wouldn't have to do an interview? They were just going to share the results with you.
They never said that.
Here's how it really went down.
I'm Bruce Mattingly with Fremont Sheriff's Office, and the sheriff said that you've been working at trying to get a hold of us.
Yes.
And to talk on the autopsy results. You're here, and we're here. Want to take a few minutes and talk about that and go over that? Okay. We
decided we're gonna wait, learn what it is when you're ready to release it.
Detective Mattingly, do you recognize the voices in that recording?
I do.
Do you know who that female voice is that we're hearing?
That was Emma Daybell.
And did you hear in there where she confirmed she was the one that had requested the autopsy results?
Yes.
I'm going to continue playing. I stopped it at 6:31.
Okay. That is a choice, but
Emma,
We usually just let family, we always let family know. Personally, I've not had anybody really say that they want to wait.
We're just not interested in interviewing, answering any questions. We just want to see it.
Sure, we're not asking for an interview.
I'm going to pause right there, Detective Mattingly. Did you hear Emma again decline to see the results?
Yes.
And what did you tell her in relation to whether or not she would have to be subjected to an interview?
I told her she didn't have to do an interview.
Emma poses an interesting dilemma. It's not inconceivable that she has done and continues to do real harm to the survivors with her lies, her disrespect, and her utter disdain for the investigation. She is certainly one of Chad's victims, but it's also important to note that her lack of empathy for those murdered, as well as those affected by the murders, arguably makes her a perpetrator of abuse in her own right. Let's shift to Garth Daybell's testimony. I want to focus mainly on testimony where he describes how the investigation turned its attention to him as the story about the night Tammy died began to unravel. Let's listen to him describe being picked up by police for additional questioning, as well as his view of why he was summoned to testify at a second grand jury.
I want to talk to you a little bit about May 7th of 2021. Do you recall that day for some reason?
I do.
And what happened on that particular day?
I went out to the driveway to my car, and there were several law enforcement vehicles across the street, and several officers got out and surrounded me and insisted that I go with them.
Did they give you any choice?
I felt like I had no choice.
And then what transpired next?
They drove me to the police station. They confiscated my phone.
Okay. At any point, did they try to talk to you?
They did.
Okay. And what was the nature of the discussion?
They were telling me that my story was untrue and that I needed to change it.
And at some point, did you ask to have an attorney represent you?
I did.
As a reminder, I did chop this up quite extensively, but I just wanted to get the side-by-side of exactly what Garth said versus exactly what Lindsay said. Here she is.
And counsel talked to you about May 7th of 2021. Do you recall that?
I do.
And do you recall when you got to the police station that they left the door open to the interview room?
They did.
And do you recall that they immediately told you they'd call your attorney?
I believe I had to ask for one.
And did your attorney in fact show up?
A few hours later.
And was your attorney present for questioning?
He was.
Did law enforcement actually get you breakfast?
They did buy me some McDonald's. They offered and I accepted.
Here's the side-by-side about the second grand jury.
Was there another occasion when you were accused of or asked to change your story?
I was summoned to 2 separate grand juries.
Okay, I want to talk about the second grand jury. And do you have an understanding of why you were summoned in front of the grand jury?
It was made pretty plain that I needed to change my story to fit theirs.
Okay, and in the event you didn't change your story, you would be indicted by the grand jury?
Yes, and they had a list of charges that they were threatening me with.
And your understanding of going in front of the grand jury is that you were going to be indicted unless you changed your story?
Yes.
And the focus of the second grand jury, did you understand that to be you being charged with a grand jury offense?
I understand that it was that way. I felt very, I was feeling extremely pressured.
Pressured by who?
The prosecutors.
Here's Lindsay Blake in her cross.
And then do you recall counsel talking to you about you having testified at a couple grand jury proceedings?
Yes.
Are you aware that the second grand jury was conducted based on the request of the first grand jury?
I was not aware of that.
Even if Garth wasn't aware that both grand juries thought he lied, he is certainly aware that he did in fact lie to protect his father. At Lori's trial, investigators used cell data, text messages, and Tammy's autopsy results to impeach Garth's testimony. They presented the same evidence at Chad's trial, plus they had an additional witness. Micaiah Bagelin, who was a friend and co-worker of Garth's, was one of several people to hear a version of events the night Tammy died that was different than what Garth and Chad originally told police. Let's hear what he has to say.
Mr. Bagelin, do you know an individual named Garth Daybell?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall an occasion when he did share something with you about some family issues?
He told me it was the following weekend after his mom's passing. He talked about that.
What do you recall him telling you about that?
I remember he said that he found her when he got home from work and he didn't know where his father was. And I don't remember if he said that she was in the bed or next to the bed, but she said she was kind of pale and her lips were blue.
And your understanding from what Garth told you was when he got home, he found his mother.
Yeah.
And at that time, her lips were blue and she was pale,
Yes,
and that he did not know where his father was.
correct.
Contrast this with Garth's story.
I got home about 1 a.m. shortly after that.
You didn't see any images in the bedroom of any kind of a struggle or a fight or any kind of an altercation, did you?
No, as far as I knew, it was a normal night.
And then at early in the morning at some point, you were awoken. Is that right?
Yes.
And how were you awoken?
I heard my dad saying, Garth, get up. I need help.
Okay.
And I got out of bed and ran over to help.
And then when you walked into your parents' bedroom, what exactly did you observe?
I observed my mother had rolled partially out of bed with her legs entangled in the sheets.
The prosecution successfully impeached this story with multiple testimonies and common sense. Dead women don't roll out of bed on their own. They were able to show that Tammy sustained injuries consistent with a struggle and secured a guilty verdict for murder. And finally, I want to take a quick look at a few statements from Emma's husband, Joe Murray's testimony, where he bluntly reveals a level of entitlement they all share. Key context here is that Joe and Emma moved into the murder house right after Chad was arrested. This time it's Prosecutor Wixom handling the cross. Let's listen.
Now, you testified that at some point in time, Detective Hermosillo had been seen driving by this property.
Yep, before and after Chad's arrest.
And that was something that you had observed personally?
Yep.
And at that point, had you met Detective Hermosillo?
Yes.
And that's how you were able to identify him?
Yep. And I've also seen him on Facebook.
Did you see Detective Hermosillo the day that Tylee and JJ were found?
I can't recall for sure on that day.
You don't have any reason to disagree that Detective Hermosillo was one of the lead investigators in this case?
No, I have no reason to disagree on that.
No reason to disagree that, in fact, he was there the day that the bodies were found?
I would assume so.
So you wouldn't disagree that for law enforcement to drive back and forth by this property, that they may have suspected the bodies were, and in fact found the bodies there. That wouldn't necessarily be unusual, would it?
Perhaps no. However, this was even after the bodies were taken out, that he would slowly drive by the property.
And to that point, so you would disagree that a detective who discovers bodies on a property, arrests somebody from the property, might have a surveillance or investigative interest in continuing to drive by the property to identify if someone else was coming back to the property after the bodies had been removed. You don't disagree with that, do you?
I don't see the reason for it.
You're not a law enforcement officer, are you?
Absolutely not. I would rather choose any other profession.
Joe's hostility seems so misplaced. Instead of supporting the investigation, all three individuals circle the wagons and adopt an us versus them mentality to justify their cruelty and even perjury. Emma and Garth claim in their testimony that they loved Tammy very much, and I believe them. However, they lack the courage and character to stand up to Chad's evil. So what was life like in the Daybell house under Chad? The picture that emerges for me about Tammy is one of a woman who has spent her whole life with her husband and her family at its center. By all accounts, she enjoyed her role as wife and mother, but midlife is a time for reflection, evaluation, and making necessary adjustments to transition into a different phase of life. She was also dealing with her own aging parents. She likely had finances and planning for retirement, as well as taking care of her loved ones after she was gone on her mind, as we heard from the evidence about her increasing her life insurance policy. At 49, Tammy was dealing with the physical changes associated with aging, especially menopause or perimenopause, which would explain her increased fatigue, sleep disruption, and depression. Aging is not for the faint of heart, and I have no trouble believing Tammy had a lot on her plate. Given how easily Garth and Emma betrayed her memory, it's not a far leap to think she didn't have the support from her immediate family she could have had as she navigated these challenges. This would be especially true if she had set up and reinforced over decades a pattern of her doing for and giving to others at the expense of her own needs. There is no constant except change, and Tammy's place in her family was changing, even if some of those changes weren't known to her. In the year before her death, her husband had become obsessed with another woman, and while there's no evidence that she knew of the affair, it is not hard to imagine that she felt the distance in her marriage. Even before he met Lori, Chad told people in his prepper groups that Tammy wouldn't live past 50, a prophecy that Emma, at least, took at face value, as you can see in this post she made the day Tammy died. There were rumors that Chad was actively looking to cheat on Tammy and tried to get with Julie Rowe and Melanie Gibb before he met Lori. I think it's safe to say that Tammy was not the priority for Chad that he was for her. Chad's focus was chasing fame and glory to trade for sex and aggrandizing himself with the doomsday books that Tammy's labor helped publish. If she'd started retiring early, perhaps she did so to be alone with her thoughts and feelings. Or maybe she had a more immediate goal. Perhaps she was beginning to understand that Chad didn't love her, at least not the way she loved him. But that didn't stop him from trying to control even the few hours of downtime she had by forbidding her to play Candy Crush on her phone. And that's the key here, control. Chad could have left Tammy, divorced her, and let her find her joy outside of him. Lori likewise could have divorced Charles and made other arrangements for JJ and Tylee. But simply being together and living out their cringe love story wasn't enough for Chad and Lori. Chad was a prophet and Lori was a goddess. Controlling behavior seeks to dominate to validate, often by increasingly manipulative and abusive means. It's insidious because it's human nature to explain away an odd behavior here or give in to an unrealistic demand there if we love and trust someone. But at some point, a line gets crossed. And maybe it had dawned on Tammy in her final days that something was amiss. Perhaps her world tilted after Alex tried to assassinate her in her driveway. The tumblers fell into place, and she finally sensed the mortal danger she was in. Of course, this is pure speculation on my part, and we will never know Tammy's private thoughts during her final days. Chad may be soft-spoken, but he is a deeply dangerous, controlling, and manipulative man. He deserved and received the harshest penalty available to the state of Idaho, and is now in a maximum security prison outside of Boise. That said, he still has as much access as he would like to Emma, Joe, Garth, and the rest of his kids. And they appear willing to continue to subjugate and debase themselves in service to him. All three mentioned here express that they still believe in at least some of Chad's teachings, and they've alienated themselves from Tammy's family. More worrying, though, is that they are all grade school teachers. They are parents and are responsible for the care and shaping of young minds throughout their communities. Let's hope that they can find the courage to acknowledge who their father is, identify the problematic elements of their beliefs, and begin to heal. Otherwise, Chad's dark influence may continue through them for years. This is where we'll leave it for today. Stay tuned for future videos where we will deep dive into the origin and intersection of Chad's doomsday beliefs. In the meantime, check out the playlist linked in the show notes below. Until next time, be safe, be well, love yourself, love your neighbor. Bye for now.